Welcome to Comma Rules Review. This video discusses some of the more commonly used comma rules. First, most of the comma rules will be easier to understand if you can pick out the subject and verb of a sentence, and you can determine if a group of words is a complete sentence or not. Sentences are also referred to as independent clauses. Let's define an independent clause. It must have a subject plus a verb plus be a complete thought. The easiest way to pick out a subject and verb is to start by looking for the action in the sentence. This is going to be your verb. The subject is someone or something that is doing this action. For example, Bob threw his grammar book against the wall. The action is threw. Bob is the person who is doing this action. Therefore, the word threw is the verb and the word Bob is the subject. Now we have to determine if this is a complete thought. A quick test is to ask yourself, if I walked up to someone and said this, would it make sense, or does there seem like there's something missing? With the previous example, Bob threw his grammar book against the wall. Yes, it makes sense. You might wonder who Bob is, but you would understand what I'm saying. Here's another example. Until I went home. First, it does have a subject and verb. The action word is went, so that is the verb. The person doing the action is I, so that is the subject. But it fails the complete thought test. Until I went home. So this is not a complete sentence. Now let's start with our first comma rule. Use a comma before a coordinating conjunction joining independent clauses. You know what an independent clause is now. But what about a conjunction? A conjunction is a word that connects clauses, phrases, and other words. A quick way to remember them all is by the acronym FANBOYS. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Probably the most popular fanboys are and, but, and so. This rule means that when you connect two complete sentences using a conjunction, one of the fanboys, then you need a comma before the conjunction. In this example, the conjunction is and. He went to the mall and he bought a pretzel. In the clause before the conjunction, he is the subject and went is the verb. He went to the mall. That makes complete sense, and so it is a complete sentence. What about the clause after the conjunction? He bought a pretzel. The action is bought, so that's the verb. The person doing the action is he, so that is the subject. Is it a complete thought? He bought a pretzel. Yes, it is. So according to this rule, you need a comma before the conjunction. But what if this sentence was a little different? If we remove the subject that comes after the conjunction, and the sentence now reads, he went to the mall and bought a pretzel, we no longer have two sentences connected by a conjunction. Therefore, the comma rule does not apply to this sentence, and a comma is no longer required before the word and. Here's another comma rule. Use a comma after an introductory clause or phrase. Even if you are not sure what a clause or phrase is, this rule boils down to the fact that when you need to separate extra information that comes before your simple sentence, then you need a comma. To isolate the simple sentence, guess what you do? Just as before, you have to determine the subject and verb. Here's an example. When Juanita packed her book bag, she forgot her grammar book. The subject is she, and the verb is forgot. She forgot her grammar book is the simple sentence. When Juanita packed her book bag is extra information placed before this basic sentence. Therefore, it needs a comma after it. This particular rule does take some practice, but isolating the subject and verb will help you figure out if you have extra information that needs to be separated by a comma. Another important comma rule requires using a comma between all items in a series. You may have heard that this rule is optional, but in academic prose, which is what college students write, this is not the case. It is never optional when you are writing for school. You may have seen work written in newspapers that do not adhere to this rule, but those are not academic works. A series includes 3 or more items. These can be words or phrases. Here's an example. He bought a grammar book, spiral notebook, and paperback thesaurus for school. Notice how there is a comma after the first 2 items in the series, and this includes the comma before and. Here's the next comma rule we will examine. Use a comma between coordinate adjectives not joined with and. Do not use a comma between cumulative adjectives. An adjective is a descriptive word like large, round, and red. Adjectives can describe nouns as well as other adjectives. Coordinate means they are describing a noun separately. Cumulative means adjectives lean on each other. Here are a few adjective comma tricks you can try to simplify whether or not you put a comma between adjectives. Trick 1. Put the word and in between the descriptive words. He was a bright and witty and weird boy. A second trick is to move the adjectives around. He was a weird, witty, bright boy. Do the tricks work? If you can put an and in between the adjectives or move them around, and the sentence still makes sense, and the meaning does not change, then you can add commas between them. He was a bright, witty, weird boy. What if the tricks don't work? If the meaning changes, or the sentence just sounds wacky, then that's a clue that you don't add commas between the adjectives. For example, 3 large gray shapes moved towards us. Here's the sentence using the first trick, adding and. 3 and large and gray shapes moved towards us. That sounds weird. Here's trick number 2, moving the adjectives around. Large gray 3 shapes moved towards us. Trick 1 and 2 do not work, so that means you don't put commas in between the adjectives. When to place commas around clauses is our next rule. Use commas to set off non-restrictive clauses. Do not put commas around restrictive clauses. Restrictive elements limit the meaning, so these words are necessary for the sentence. Without them, they can change the meaning of the sentence. Non-restrictive elements are not needed. If they are not included in the sentence, the meaning does not change. They are just extra information. Here's an example of a sentence with a restrictive clause. Ramona's cat that just had kittens becomes defensive around the other cats in the house. The clause, that just had kittens, distinguishes this cat from other cats in the house, so we need that information in the sentence. This means it is restrictive, and as a result, no commas are needed around it. Here's an example of a sentence with a non-restrictive clause. Ed's house, which is located on 10 acres, is well furnished. The clause, which is located on 10 acres, is extra information. Nothing would change if it was removed from the sentence. Ed's house is well furnished. Therefore, it is non-restrictive and must be set off by commas on each side. You will find a number of other rules in your grammar book, but the rules just covered in this video are some of the main ones you will often have to deal with in your writing. You have probably heard the motto, when in doubt, leave it out, but I suggest the opposite. When you are writing up a draft of an assignment, be comma happy. Put commas in wherever it feels right. Then, and this is really important or the comma happy suggestion will not work for you, when you go back to rewrite your draft, check your commas against the rules in your grammar book. If you can't match a rule to a comma that you placed in your writing, then you probably do not need the comma. However, about 50% of the time, you will probably be correct, and as you start to look up the rules over and over again, you will begin to remember them when you write and edit your writing assignments. This means you will have to look them up less and less.